Good evening, folks, and welcome to the live stream. I hope you're all very well this evening. Let's see who we have on tonight. Before we start, we have a membership donation from Alistair. Thank you so much, Alistair. Very kind of you. That's to Shell, Shetty Rat, Mark, Joe Lefty, and Mad Monk. Thank you so much for that. We also have a super chat from Cavan Lad. Thank you so much for that, for your support there. Hey you, back to you, Cavan Lad. So who else have we got on tonight? We have Mark, we have Raven 1983 Witch, great to see you. Chatty Rat is here. We have also Frederick, great to see you. Aki's Mad up there in Scotland. Stefan up there in Scotland too. We also have Mad Monk, Artibus, great to see you. Niall, great to have you on. Hope you're well tonight. Alistair, once again, great to see you. Killer, thank you for moderating tonight, Killer. Hope you're well on this Friday night. We have, let me see, Jim is here. Saito, great to see you. Who else have we got? Derek, great to see you, Derek. Reagan Elite, great to have you on, Reagan Elite. Make sure to check out Reagan Elite's YouTube channel. We have Rod, we have Shell, we have Doc Davies, great to see you. Scott Hunter, great to have you on, and so many more. Hope you're all very well. Hope you had a nice week. It's been an interesting week, can I put it that way? So a number of things have happened. I'll talk a little bit about what's happening in Scotland in a moment. But there's a few strange videos that's come my way. Hi Max, how's you? I'm doing very well tonight. Yes, very well. Thank you so much for that. So let's jump into. So I covered this in a video. Well, part of this in a video today, where Sophie Rich from Sky News went out and met some people in Grimsby. Grimsby, I believe, voted 70% in favour of Brexit in 2016. So it leans a particular way. So she asked some people in the audience in Grimsby what they think of Keir Starmer. And have a listen.
Let's do something, shall we? Right. If I say the word Keir Starmer, what word pops into your head? What word pops into your head? If I say Keir Starmer, what word?
Jimmy Savile.
What do you reckon, Keir Starmer?
Jimmy Savile.
Keir Starmer?
The Jimmy Savile CPS decision.
I'm unsure.
Unsure. Interesting. How about Keir Starmer? Any other thoughts, Keir Starmer?
Jimmy Savile.
There you go. Keir Starmer?
I don't know. I don't know what to say.
I mean, it's not glowing, is it? I'll be honest.
The first thing people think of when Keir Starmer is mentioned, Jimmy Savile. Jimmy Savile campaigned for the Conservatives. Jimmy Savile was seen with Prince Charles at the time, King Charles today. He was seen with hanging around with Margaret Thatcher. When I think of Keir Starmer, I think of boring. I don't think of Jimmy Savile. Obviously, this audience was selected. I'm not sure how some of these people... Well, it's pretty clear how some of these people got in. They just said we're Tories, and it's like, okay, a bit like, when... Who else? Question Time. When Question Time have an audience, they select, generally Tories. Their argument is that, well, we select Tories because the Conservatives won a majority at the last election. So it'll be interesting to see if Question Time audiences are majority Labour supporters at the next election, following the next election. I doubt that'll be the case. Political X, my wonderful co-host on the Sunday Roast. Remember to check out the Sunday Roast this Sunday. We have two wonderful guests. An EU and Brexit related Sunday Roast. That'd be interesting. Name another family that's hung out with Savile, Rolf Harris and Epstein. Yes. Anyway, another interesting video I wanted to show you was this is put together by Blades of the Sun. Mick Lynch. Mick Lynch should be king. Have a listen to this.
We've got people who are doing full-time jobs who are having to take state benefits and use food banks. That is a national disgrace.
What will they do if agency workers try to cross those picket lines?
Well, we will picket them. What do you think we'll do? We run a picket line and we'll ask them not to go to work. Direct lie.
If you are a Marxist, then you're into revolution and into bringing down capitalism. So are you or aren't you?
Richard, you do come up with the most remarkable twaddle sometimes.
The unions
don't tell me who I am and whether or not I'm working class or what, any of those sorts of things.
I didn't tell you you weren't working class. I don't even know your name.
On the street. You can see what picketing involves. I can't believe this line of questioning. Picketing is standing outside the workplace to try and encourage people who want to go to work not to go to work. What else do you think it involves? You've also lied that we left negotiations on Saturday and went to a rally. There were no negotiations scheduled for Saturday. You are a liar. The pensions of our members are going to be decimated. They're going to make us poorer not only while we're at work, but poorer in retirement. And that's an agenda that the government has got because they want to subsidise the private sector in this country, as they are doing in the health service, which is being consumed by the private sector, as they've done in the education service, which is being consumed by the private sector.
He should be apologising to the doctors and nurses who can't get to hospital, the patients who can't get their operation, the kids who will miss out on their education today, but also those armed forces veterans who risk their lives for our freedoms, who won't be able to celebrate Armed Forces Day on Saturday.
Do you want to apologise for all that, Mick?
Well, I think Jonathan should apologise for talking nonsense. None of that is true.
And you're a liar.
What the rest of the country suffers from is the lack of power, the lack of the ability to organise, and the lack of the wherewithal to take on these employers that are continually driving down wages and making the working class in this country poorer year on year on year, while the rich get richer. I welcome anyone that wants to join us on our picket lines and show us messages of support.
All right, well,
if Keir Starmer can't do that, that's a problem for him, not for us. I don't want people to be inconvenienced, and I want a settlement to this dispute. I can't do that with a backbench MP who's just learnt it off a script. And one of the reasons we're not affiliated is because Labour politicians since Blair have not identified with working class people. And failing to do that is one of the problems they've got in working class communities, and they've left the door open to populists and others to come into the situation. The Labour Party is about supporting working people, or it should be, not triangulating from opinion makers such as the Daily Mail and the Telegraph and the Times. So they've got to sort out their identity, and they've got to come up with a set of policies. There are lower paid people and there are wealthy people in this society. And what's wrong in this society is that there is an imbalance between the people that do the work to keep this country going, who create the wealth of our civilisation and don't get a fair share of that wealth because it's going to people who are vastly wealthy. Labour should be comfortable with backing working class people who are struggling, and one of the ways that they can redress the imbalance is through industrial action where negotiations fail. What else are we to do? Are we to plead? Are we to beg? We want to bargain for our futures. We want to negotiate. And if we're not bargaining, you have to beg. And I don't want any working class people in this country to have to beg the employers for a decent living. And Keir Starmer shouldn't want that either.
Wonderful guy, wonderful guy. As I said before, you know, with the blind spot of Brexit, let's leave Brexit aside. He's a hero for many people. He's somebody who stands up and fights. He's somebody who's not afraid to say exactly how he feels. And he speaks, on behalf of millions. Millions of people agree with him. We have a super chat from, let me just double check. From Freckle Punny, thank you so much for that. Jimmy Savile. So which Prime Minister recommended him for a knighthood against advice? Which Prime Minister invited him to number 10? Which government gave him the keys to Broadmoor? Exactly. So, it's one thing for Tory voters to say, well, the first thing I think about when I hear about Keir Starmer is Jimmy Savile. Well, you should also apply that to maybe the Conservative Party as well. And one final video I wanted to share with you. This is West Streeting. Not a huge fan of West Streeting, but this was a wonderful clip where he talks about sick note Britain. Not everything I agree with, but this was something to hear.
I don't think we have a sick note culture and a lazy workforce. I think we have a sickness problem and a lazy government. And I think only this Prime Minister, only this Prime Minister sat in number 10 looking at NHS waiting lists just south of 8 million, looking at mental health waiting lists that see 40,000 children in our country waiting over 2 years for treatment, and think that what we really need to do is sort out the bit of the system that gives them sick notes rather than sort out the bit of the system that keeps people waiting so long for treatment and care. And of course GPs are having a real problem at the moment with their workloads. And yes, I think it is true, and I've said myself in the past, that I think there are GPs who are dishing out sick notes without being able to see their patients in the way they'd want to because they've got an enormous backlog. Of course that's the case, because there are thousands fewer GPs than there were in 2015. But if we want to sort this problem out, and if we want to deal with the fact that the benefits bill is rising and people are off work and it's harming our economy, then let's deliver 2 million more appointments a year to cut NHS waiting lists with £1.1 billion, as Labour's committed to. Let's have mental health support in every school. Let's have mental health hubs in every community. Let's train 8,500 mental health support workers, as Labour has committed to do. Let's double the number of scanners so we could diagnose earlier and treat faster, as Labour has committed to do.
These are great things. I agree with you 100%, but you don't have the staff. You don't have the resources. Like, it's one thing saying what we're going to do is double the number of scanners, but you need staff to operate those scanners. You need a bureaucracy to process all the people using those scanners. So it's one thing to say we're going to reduce the waiting list. It's another to say how you're going to do that. Ed here, Sem Priest, Remain voters deserve a voice. Yes, they do. And when it comes to the local elections, they may have a voice in Rejoin EU. Do check them out if you can. But it seems the mainstream parties, with the exception of the Greens and the SNP, have just abandoned the idea of rejoining the European Union and trying to move as far away from Brexit as possible.
If we can get people treated and back on their feet, we can get them back to work. But I'll just conclude by saying this, and it goes to the heart of the question, actually, and about this Prime Minister, and particularly what he says about mental health. He hasn't got the first clue what it is like to lie awake at night worrying about whether you can pay your rent, whether you can pay your mortgage, whether your home is going to be repossessed, whether you're going to be evicted, whether your kids are going to self-harm or attempt suicide. He hasn't got the first clue. And I think we need a Prime Minister and a government that is in touch and has a record of delivering on the NHS, and that change can only come for a general election, and that general election cannot come soon enough.
So let me just ask you, because there are a number of pledges you've made, which you made before in terms of doubling the number of district nurses, more health visitors, doubling the number of CT, MRI scanners, all that kind of thing. Labour said they were going to pay for that by abolishing the non-dom tax status. The government's stolen a march on you, as already says.
The issue is not paying for it, because you can find money, you can borrow, you can print more money. The issue is not the money itself. Money is an issue, yes, but the main problem here for the NHS is not money, it's staff.
Going to do that. So where is the money going to come from, all the things you've just listed?
Well, hang on. So when you say the government stolen the march, the government went from saying, oh, no, not the poor old non-doms, and by the way, they'll leave and you'll never get the money in.
No, they took your idea. There's no doubt about that.
And they've said,
they took your idea, but nonetheless.
But anyway, let's move on.
That's how you were going to pay for all the things. How are you going to pay for them now?
Clamp down on tax avoidance and close the tax gap in our country, where we see far too many people not paying their fair share, who tend to be people who can afford to pay. That's the first thing.
The tax gap is...
Okay, but tax loopholes... Okay. But look, I've said before, you need to introduce tax on wealth.
Smallest it's ever been, Wes.
Close the gap.
As you know.
Close the loopholes enjoyed by private equity fund managers, because we think people need mental health treatment more than those people need tax breaks. I think when you look at Labour spending plans...
So is that going to raise enough money for all those things?
Yes, it will.
Those two things you just cited?
Yes, it will. And not least because Rachel Reeves is going to put the resource into HMRC to make sure that we can go after people who are not paying their fair share of tax. And look, people can judge us now. You know, the Tories said before Labour's numbers aren't credible, but then they nicked Labour's tax-raising plan. So I think we can see...
That's a good point. The Tories will say Labour don't have a plan, and then they go, OK, let's actually borrow their plan. So, yeah, he's completely correct here. But for me, the big issue, of course, is staff. Where are you going to find the staff necessary to bring down the waiting list? Where are you going to find the staff to fill the vacancies in the care sector, which is desperately... adding to the waiting list, because if people are not being moved out of the care sector, people can't be moved into it. And if people can't be moved into it, then of course you're going to get a backlog. Pint-sized. So I got a bit of criticism online about repeating Angela Rayner's line, but it's actually something taken from Nadine Dorris's book, where she called Rishi Sunak a pint-sized loser who stabbed Boris Johnson in the back. Gareth, thank you so much for that super chat. Off-streeting, you big long streak of pish. Oh, pish. He's gone. He's going now. Now, just on this idea of a sick note culture, it's absolutely ridiculous, because there are so many people who can't access the services they need, be them related to mental health or physical health, and that's why they're off sick, because they're not able to get treated in time, and they can't work. Like, if they could be treated quickly, then they could be back in the workplace. Okay, so let's jump to the main story tonight, which is, of course, what's happening with the SNP and the Green Party in Scotland. Joseph vows to stay in power as pressure builds on his government. In battle, Humza Yousaf has told Sky News that he will not resign as Scotland's First Minister. Pressure has been building on the SNP leader after he tore up the power-sharing deal with the Scottish Greens, prompting a no-confidence motion in his leadership and a threatened knife-edge vote. However, Mr. Yousaf, on a visit to Dundee that was arranged at short notice after he pulled out of a speech in Glasgow, insisted he was getting on with the job and accusing the opposition of playing games. Alistair, thank you so much for that super chat. Very kind of you. Wow. Alistair says the Scottish Act Part 46 states no competency vote, no confidence vote in the First Minister does not affect who runs the government in Scotland, only the First Minister. So the new First Minister will be elected by the SNP members. Yes. And I think, so there are a number of things that the media are not reporting on or not reporting correctly. And one is that if Humza Yousaf loses the confidence vote, even if he wins it, there'll be pressure on him to leave. If he loses it, it will mean that the SNP have 28 days to find a replacement. And, they have, 64, 63, 64, 65 members of the Scottish Parliament that they can choose from. So I would imagine it would be pretty quick that they would find a replacement. Look, on the surface, this is not looking good for the SNP and the Scottish government, but it's possible that they could replace the current leader, put in somebody who the party support, and move on from that. But if they're not able to do that, if they're not able to get the confidence, so there will no doubt be another confidence vote in the new leader. And if they can convince a number of, I imagine a number of members of the Scottish MSPs from other parties to support them in the confidence vote, then they will be able to form the government. So I think at the moment, it's of course it's not looking good for the current leader, but when he is replaced by somebody else in the SNP, it will be a time to move on. I think it's sad that it has come to this situation where, the SNP and the Greens are splitting, because both parties are supportive of independence. I saw an interview with Alex Salmond from the Alpa Party, who was rubbing his hands with glee because he realised now there's an opportunity for my member of the Scottish Parliament, what's her name, Reagan, to potentially bring him down, to bring down the current leader of the SNP. So it's and then they will be kingmaker, so they will be able to say, well, we will be part of who will be the next Scottish First Minister. So it says here some of the numbers in the Scottish Parliament. The SNP have 63 seats out of 129, too short of an outright majority. The Conservatives have 31, Labour 22, the Greens have 7, the Liberal Democrats 4, Alpha Party has 1. There's also one presiding officer, Alison Johnston, who is both a member of the Scottish Parliament and Scotland's equivalent of the Common Speaker. Yeah, Ash Regan is the one who's, who's going to be, who'll have the deciding vote, it seems. And Salmond wants to wield power once again. So I think this... Ash is not fit to lick Humza's boots. But there are unionist parties that pull the stunt monthly until the end of Parliament in 2026. Yeah, so what they're hoping for is a vote, an ending of Parliament sooner rather than 2026. So the next vote, of course, is expected to take place in 2026. But if whoever the SNP select as the next First Minister does not receive support of the entire Parliament or a majority in the Parliament, then it's possible that they'll have to find another one, and if they don't do it within 28 days, then Parliament will be dissolved and there will be elections. But I would imagine there will be elections now and then more elections in 2026. Or is it everything is reset? I don't know. Stephen Flynn for First Minister. See, I think some of the parties may think that the opposition parties in Scotland might think, now is our opportunity to bring down the SNP. But it depends on who takes over, and it depends on what the manifesto is. Because I think, while I don't like Alex Salmond, I think he's on to something when he says that if the party can present itself as an independence-focused party. Now, he's saying that it's not, at the moment, it's not an independence-focused party. But if it can, then it will see its support increase. I really need to speak to someone in Scotland about this because I'm flying blind somewhat. I'm Scottish, can I have a go? Probably. Humza was ambushed by Vote, Stitch Up Central. Thanks so much, Gareth. Is Ramsey Nesbitt still alive to be offered the job? MSPs cannot vote against him. Could vote against him. So it's not guaranteed. Greens are reconsidering voting against. Are they? That would be really weird, wouldn't it? The Greens, although I heard that there's some bad blood between the Green Party and the SNP at the moment, so it's possible that maybe they vote with the SNP, and then that would be a bit sort of embarrassing for the other parties like the Tories, who've been pushing hard on this no confidence vote. So is it? I don't know, guys. In your opinion, would it be a good idea to replace the current leader, set up and have somebody else take over, give the party some sort of reboot? I don't know. Alex Salmond is a unionist, Max. He keeps saying that he wants the focus to be on independence, that he thinks all of these other things are a distraction. He's certainly happy to sit down with people who are very anti-Scottish. That's, in England. And I'm not talking about English people. I'm talking about people in right-wing media. So he's very happy to sit down with those people and badmouth the government. Now, of course, he's sitting in opposition, or his party's in opposition. But give me a call, Max. Then we'll have to set up a call for that. And then you can explain exactly how things are. Thanks so much, David. If there's a Scottish government election, if there is, it will be an indie vote in my opinion, Max. Thanks so much, Alistair, as well for that. Do check out Indie Truck Davies' YouTube channel, The Two Davies. He knows everything about Scotland and more. So definitely we'll reach out to David for that, because this is so. It seems next Wednesday is when the no confidence vote will take place, and then we'll see what's going to happen after that. So it would be interesting to go through a few scenarios with David. So I will contact you after that, after the show probably, to sort out a date with you. That'd be great. And on that, I'll better move on, because I'm just going to make a fool of myself. Are there any Scots on the stream? I think there may be one or two. So moving on, Rishi Sunak will feel Reset Week was job well done, but a horrible reality check awaits. So call it the Rishi Sunak Reset Week, or borrow it from the Spectator's Katie Bowles, the Shurup Sunak Week. The Prime Minister will be going into this weekend feeling the past few days have been job well done. He got his flagship Rwanda bill through Parliament, and is promising a regular rhythm of flights will get off the ground from July. He also got off the ground himself with a dash to Poland and Germany in a show of strength with European allies in the face of Russian aggression, as the US finally approved the $61 billion military aid package for Ukraine. Our Prime Minister announced he'd lift the UK defence spending to 2.5% of GDP by 2030. That would amount to £87 billion a year by the start of the 2030s, with UK spending a cumulative extra £75 billion on the military over the next 6 years. That of course all hangs on winning the election, which I'll come to soon. But it is a commitment that throws a challenge to Labour, and will delight those in his party who have been calling for increased military spending, defence spending for months in the face of growing global threats from Russia, China and Iran. Isn't it interesting that when it comes to military spending, there's no problem finding the money? There's no, how are you going to pay for it? And well, he was eventually asked, how are you going to pay for it? And he said, well, we're going to impose austerity, basically. We're going to reduce the size of the civil service, which is basically cutting public services, because you can't run public services without staff. So if you're going to remove the staff, you're removing those services. So austerity, basically, cutting public services. So that's how he said it seems he's going to boost military spending. So it goes on to say Sunak needs to look big. At this, both furiously shook their heads and looked at me with a touch of derision. When it comes to the local elections, I want my bins done, I want my schools to be good, and I want my potholes done. That's what I care about, says Ruth. The people in Birmingham Yardley speak of nothing else but the 2.5% defence spending. Jokes Jess Phillips. I see why, but actually I don't think he's doing for just another example of doing it this week. He needs to look big in front of his party. Yeah, this is about Rishi Sunak trying to reach out to the party, trying to reset, trying to say, look, I'm doing big things. And, when it comes to big things, it's about distracting. It's about convincing the public that he's doing something when he's actually not. And, this 2.5% of GDP for military spending or defense spending, it's easy for him to say this when he probably won't be around. He knows he won't be around. It's just about, I keep saying this, tactics. It's about convincing a section of the party or the public that you're doing something today. So you hold on to their support for today. That's it. Worry about tomorrow. So Rwanda is about holding on to a small section of society, because the vast majority of people are not happy with Rwanda. They don't think it's going to work. So there's a small section of his party and society who are happy with the Rwanda bill. It was a waste of time and a waste of money and political capital, but we're talking about tactics here. It's not about, there isn't a strategy here. There isn't any long-term thinking. 2.5% of GDP, Christ alive, bairns, not bombs. Well said, Gareth. That money could be spent, 80 billion, it could be spent on schools, on hospitals, on something that, could be good for society. But even if you don't want to spend it on schools, hospitals, whatever, if you're to invest it in infrastructure, if you were to invest it in the green economy, you'd actually create jobs and create growth. That would be one way of doing it. And you get the money back, because we know when government spends money, they get money back, generally. Unless it's water companies. Brad, thank you so much for that super chat. Sunak wouldn't look big if he stood next to to the hobbits in the Lord of the Rings. Yeah. Maybe, was he wearing platform shoes, or is Schultz quite short as well? but it's, you know, it's about appearing big on the world stage. I think when it comes to, we're going to boost military spending. The Tories have cut military spending over the last 14 years, and they've cut the size of the army in half, I believe, over the last 14 years. So when they turn around and say, we care about growing the economy, we care about improving the military, no, they don't. It's just for show. They'll shrink the GDP until military is 2.5%. So this is the thing about, if the economy is not growing, then the military spending will not increase dramatically. Like 2.5% of GDP, if GDP is really low, then the military aren't going to get much of a boost. While if the economy is booming, 2.5% is probably pretty good. So it's all relative. But once again, I don't believe that the Tories actually are planning to do this. It's just a tactic. Thanks, Yoni. Stu, Viking President, thank you so much for that super chat as well. Sinai would not look big. Stops next to a borrower. Sunak would not look big next to a borrower. Yes. All these little jokes. I bet he's stingy. Probably. Anyway, guys, we're about halfway through the stream, so I hope you enjoyed this comedy moment, and we'll be back in just a jiffy with more serious stuff.
This is a message to the Conservative Party on behalf of the people of the United Kingdom.
It's been 14 years. In that time, you have achieved great things. You've encouraged more people to become passionately engaged in politics, while ridding our streets of the real criminals. You've enabled water companies to fully prosper by cutting petty environmental red tape. And when your friends needed you most, you showed you would do anything for them. For all that and more, we would just like to say thank you. Since the very beginning, you saved us from the boring competency of serious people and brought personality back into politics.
There are baked beans incoming.
Introducing some incredible characters that we'll never forget, even if we try really hard to.
It didn't need to be this way.
We looked on as, over the years, you used plucky British ingenuity to cling onto power through thick and thin and really very thick. All the time demonstrating an unmistakably British sense of humour.
We have never had it so good.
Strong and stable leadership with me.
So if this country is to change, then it can only be us who will deliver it.
I did not lie to the House.
Hilarious. Thank you. The historical burden of being a world-leading country was becoming too much, so you thoughtfully removed us from the global stage. Yet, you sought inspiration from international greats like China, Russia, and North Korea by supporting a healthy propaganda machine built on unwavering professionalism.
With the terror man, it's all gone wrong.
And even though you think climate change isn't really a threat, you've graciously shown commitment to the environment by reducing, reusing, and recycling. Thank you. In the past 14 years, you've saved our Victorian rail infrastructure and rescued it from unthinking modernisation. You've reduced the crippling workload of UK farmers by importing more foreign meat. And you've laid the groundwork for a beneficial new American-style health system. Thank you. No one has supported the lectern industry like you. And with no fewer than 5 prime ministers, 7 chancellors, 8 foreign secretaries, 8 home secretaries, 8 health secretaries, 10 education secretaries, and 12 culture secretaries, you really have been the party of job opportunities. It's been a remarkable 14 years for our country. Just look at all you've done. We can't even find the words to express our feelings for you. So, why not call a general election now and give the British people the chance to properly say, thank you.
Wonderful, wonderful. And that's from last year, so there's still, people are still calling for a general election, even though from last year, even though a year has passed. Okay, so let's move on. One of the new policies, let's jump to this actually first, and then we'll jump to the other one. About rail. So the Labour Party...
I wanted to get your thoughts, first of all, on our top story today.
Oh, no, I wanted to go... Damn it. I hate when this happens. This story first.
On track for a fundamental change in the way the train system is run. Labour vowing to reverse 30 years of private ownership.
Louise.
Within 5 years, the Labour politician who wants to run our transport network says privately operated train companies will be a thing of the past.
Labour will sweep away the broken model and bring private operators into public ownership as their contracts expire. We will establish Great British Railways, a single directing mind to control our railways in the passenger interest.
How are you going to make...
Okay, so that sounds interesting. So instead of terrible trains, dirty trains, or expensive trains, and infrequent trains, what they're going to do is what will happen is when these contracts run out with the private sector, the state will take over these contracts. So they'll start to provide public services for commuters. Now, it seems that when on the surface prices are not going to drop, because it's not a case of what they're going to do is start pumping loads of money in to subsidize lower prices for lower fare prices. But what they'll do is they will be able to provide better services. That's the plan, I think.
Sure that you don't end up falling into the same old trap as British Railways, where effectively to get train upgrades you are competing for cash with schools and hospitals.
Obviously, we are in a very constrained public spending environment. There is no doubt about that. But the reforms we're setting out today will deliver significant efficiencies and cost savings for the taxpayer. We think we will save the taxpayer as much as £2.2 billion every year.
Have you got an agreement from Rachel Reeves that your savings, your efficiencies, can all be channelled back into the railways?
We would hope that we would reinvest some of those savings. We've not got agreement that all of it would be.
Those rail companies now facing the axe still insist they can do a better job.
If you look at
the private rail companies, no, stick with us. Dylan, thank you so much for that support. Always makes me laugh, Mark. What did Mark say? I can't find Mark's comment. Yoni says, instead of parallel and still inadequate staffing and procurement, centralise a bit. That's a good start.
Look at the track record of private sector operators since the mid-90s. Actually, they've delivered huge amounts of innovation and also investment. £14 billion has been injected into the industry, mostly on new trains. Passenger numbers has doubled.
It was the Tories in the 1990s who abolished the publicly owned British Rail. Those with longer memories are more cautious.
I can remember when it wasn't private, and I think they're both awful.
Something needs to change, this chopping and changing from one region to the next, when one supplies it. It must be costing a fortune.
Passengers want more trains, better trains, less disruption, and feel let down. But all of that is going to take more money that isn't going to come from the private sector. But will the state really do any better?
The Tories say it's all anti-business.
It's going to be taking more companies into public ownership. It's going to mean hiring more civil servants to run them. I don't think that's very sensible. You can't do that and then say...
But the current model is not working. So how can you say, well, you should stick with the current model? The current model is not working. Now, in Italy, the trains are really good. Not perfect. There are still some problems, but we're talking about public transport. But the rail fares are really low. The quality is pretty high. But you also have the public and private sector operating together. So the private sector is highly regulated. I think this is a big problem that people seem to overlook when it comes to privatization. It seems to be a zero-sum game where you either have complete nationalization or you have complete privatization. And I think the problem with that is that you end up having the state having to invest huge amounts of money. And then obviously, as the point was raised by Sam Coates, well, where are you going to get this money from? And if you're going to talk about huge investment, is this going to be money that's going to come from somewhere else? Is health education going to suffer as a direct result of that? She couldn't answer that question. But if you have, or the alternative is just complete privatization, which is not working. So, for example, in Italy, as I said, there are state-run train companies, and there's the state-run train company, and there are also private operators, and they compete. So there's a sort of level playing field, and they compete on price. They compete with each other, and I think this is somewhere that it could work. I'm not saying it's a solution, because every country has their own solution, but you could have privatization work in the UK, but it would have to be highly regulated. And the problem is that it's not regulated because there are no standards. The Tories are not interested in regulating capitalism. They're not interested in regulating private companies. With Brexit, look at what they're doing with Brexit. Brexit was about deregulating, stripping away standards and protections. And if you look at what they're doing when it comes to the striking workers on the rail network, they're saying, well, they're the problem. We need to have fewer guards. We need to have fewer staff in train stations, stuff like this. When the unions are saying, look, we need to have more staff. We need to have more people on trains, not because we want the companies to spend more money, but because the consumer needs this. It's safer. How many times have people been, disabled people not being able to access services that they should be able to access because there aren't staff available to help them access those services? A lift is broken because it hasn't been maintained, and a disabled person can't access the other platform because they need to use the lift. If there were staff available, maybe they could be carried down the stairs or up the stairs or something. That could be a way around the problem if there are staff. But what the Tories want to do is get rid of the staff because the train companies just want to maximize profit. So privatization is not always bad, but it can work if it's highly regulated. So if the government said, these are the standards you have to meet as a private company, if you do that, then it's possible that privatization could work. But at the moment, you have private companies who are operating in a sort of Wild West, it seems. There are no real regulation, no real checks on quality. And of course, the service is terrible because they're maximizing their focus on profit and not on delivering services to the consumer. Because the consumer doesn't really have anywhere else to go. Well, if you have the private sector competing with the public sector, then of course they're going to have to, if they're competing, they're going to have to say, well, we'll have to have the lower price or the better quality or whatever. Gareth, thanks so much for that super chat. I'd help if we didn't, it'd help if we didn't treat service staff like shit, for fuck's sake. Moldy digs, outdated kit, no accountability for criminals, discrimination, appalling veteran services, and so on. 2.5%, good bloody luck. It's, one of the stories I think was Sky News had brought up. Thanks so much for that super chat. Thanks for your support. One of the stories I think Sky News ran some months back about was the quality of housing for veterans, or for not even veterans, for active personnel and their families. And the government are talking about we're going to buy more tanks and more aircraft carriers and stuff like this, when a lot of the time the money needs to go on the current infrastructure or not. Alistair, thank you so much for that super chat. Max, Labour just following Scottish Government on the Scottish Rail now, under Scottish Government for the last year. It's improved big time. So I don't know the situation with Scottish Rail, so it's under public ownership, so it's not privatised. So Labour are looking at that. so the Tories are stealing Labour policies when it comes to non-DOMs, and Labour are stealing SNP policies when it comes to nationalisation. You can't live in a tank. No, wasn't there a cartoon Tank Girl? Did she live in a tank? A manga, I think it was. But that's true. You can't live in a tank. I remember reading stories at the beginning of the Ukrainian war where Russian soldiers were trying to live inside their tanks, and they would light fires underneath to keep them warm because it's pretty cold, especially in the Ukrainian winter. So it's going to be. It's nice on paper, the idea of nationalisation, just bringing everything under public ownership, but would it actually work? So it says here, Starmer's rail plans must only be the start. It's full renationalisation that Britain needs. Is there any hope for Britain's beleaguered rail passengers? We have some of the highest fares in Europe. Industrial action are at all-time low, and cancellations and delays bedevil the network. Britain's railways are fractured, rudderless, and without clear purpose or plan. With an election looming in which Labour is the clear frontrunner, passengers must be eagerly awaiting the party's proposal. Its Getting Britain Moving plan was finally released on Thursday, promising to fix Britain's broken railways and usher in a decade of growth, innovation and service improvement through a series of reforms. Hardliners claim that Labour is going for renationalisation. It's an obvious vote winner. Opinion polls consistently show that renationalisation of railways would be very popular policy, even among Tory voters. But does that amount to what does that amount to here? Labour's proposal to gradually bring private train operators into public ownership during the length of the next Parliament, and also has already been announced by the current government. Services will be planned and operated by new arm's length public body, the Great British Railways, which will also incorporate the already publicly owned infrastructure operator Network Rail. So, as I said, on the surface it sounds like a good idea, but where is the money going to come from? And it is when they say it is popular with voters, yes. So if you say do you want the state to run the railways? Yes. Do you want nationalisation? Yes. Now, how you get to that, if you start asking those questions, well, would you fund higher taxes to cover that? Would you support cuts in other services? Then it becomes less a guaranteed vote winner. So once again, it's a case of Labour are presenting policies, but we don't know how they're going to pay for it. And I'm not asking this question like, the journalists say, how are you going to pay for it? How are you going to pay for it? Really, how is it going to be funded? Because this potentially is a massive amount of money we're talking about. This is a good idea. Private ownership of train operators increase costs and creates disorganization. Private operators don't make huge amounts of money. Some estimates put profit margins at about 2% of revenue, and 6 out of 20 companies are already state-owned. More significant are the costs of fragmentation they create, the duplication of management structures, and the costs associated with contracting and commercial disputes. The government estimates that these costs about £1.5 billion a year, or 7% of the industry's operating income. Yeah, so this makes sense. If you have a dozen small companies, sort of half state-owned, well, it makes sense just to bring them all under one umbrella, and then you save a huge amount of money on the costs related to having different operators. But once again, I still think it might be the best way to go would be to have the private sector compete with the state company on fares, and because it's possible that the criticisms people had of British Rail in the 1980s, and I don't know if these criticisms are legitimate or not, that the trains were of low quality, that the state didn't really care about innovating, didn't care about investing in new technology, and just maintained a sort of skeleton of a rail network, and that wasn't sufficient for a growing population. Is that, I don't know, would that happen again? That's the problem. Now, when it comes to one policy that Labour are thinking of getting rid of, well, there could be another policy, and that's the Rwanda bill. What will Labour do with Rwanda?
I want to get your thoughts, first of all, on our top story today. The Irish Deputy Prime Minister, Michael Martin, has said that the threat of being deported to Rwanda is causing an influx of migrants from the UK into Ireland. The Rwanda bill was only passed on Tuesday. Sounds like it's already having an effect. What do you think?
No, I'd have to strongly disagree with that, Anna. I mean, first of all, when you look at the Rwanda scheme as it stands, I mean, a cost of £2 million per asylum.
Wait a minute. How can asylum seekers go to Ireland from Britain if they don't have paperwork?
Asylum seeker possibly deported to Rwanda, £500 million for 300 people. I mean, this just cannot be justified. And the idea that it is some sort of deterrent, look, I can tell you candidly, if you were really to get the honest opinion of most government ministers, it would be them, from their own point of view, this is not really a deterrent. This is all about politics. This is always about a sideshow from, to be honest, distracting from their incredibly poor record. And there is such better usage of the funding that's gone into this scheme that could be done to genuinely tackle the problem of illegal migration. And so, to be frank, I think the government now knows, having passed the legislation, it's got a window before the summer really begins, where you tend to see a peak in illegal boat crossings across the channel, and they know time is running out for that. But I cannot justify, I don't know how anyone could justify this scheme on cost or effectiveness, because it simply isn't going to deliver what the government is saying.
And yet, Michael Martin is suggesting that it is that threat of being deported to Rwanda that is behind this influx of immigrants into Ireland. Labour said that it'll scrap the bill should you win the next election. But if it looks like it's working, will you still go ahead with that?
No, look, I mean, when you look at the whole gamut of government policy, the failures across, when people ask us questions like, if the government suddenly became competent and effective, would you keep the things that they're doing? It's a little bit too abstract, to be honest. No, we don't think this scheme can be justified. We don't think it can be justified on cost.
Okay, Gordon says the common travel area, they can travel by bus and ferry into Northern Ireland and take the train, maybe. That makes sense. Because I was thinking of if they have to travel, yeah, so there's free movement, of course, between Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and then there's free movement between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. So there isn't really, the common travel area is okay for British and Irish citizens between Great Britain and the Republic of Ireland, but it's not, yeah. So from Larne Ferry Max, it's the common travel border, no papers, I think. Yeah, I've mentioned this before, that there are no checks in a sense between Great Britain, the UK and Ireland when it comes to travel. You can be checked, you can be asked for a passport or some sort of documentation, but generally you won't be. And that would probably change now. So the Irish government may start, it's not going to infringe upon the common travel area, because that's not going to, it won't affect Irish and British citizens, because they're not impacted by this. This is a bit like what happened with, is somewhat related to, thanks Alistair, this is somewhat related to the ending of freedom of movement. So British and Irish citizens are free to move between the two islands, but EU citizens can't, because EU citizens are free to move around the island of Ireland. But if they were to move from the island of Ireland to Great Britain, they would need to have the right paperwork. So that's a problem. So this is it in sort of in reverse, where people will be able to travel from Great Britain, say, oh, I might be deported, so I'm going to go to Ireland. Look, I'm not sure of the numbers here. I haven't seen any numbers here, and I don't think this is going to be a significant number. And this, if it is, it's probably going to be a bit of a flash in the pan for a few days, and then it will quieten down. Because the Rwanda policy is more about people crossing the channel. So it's not a case of... this is about people who are already in Britain. It's people who are in Britain who think they're going to be deported. Some of them are going to Ireland. But then what's to stop them from moving back after, when Labour's in power, or it's shown that Rwanda's not working? Should we move to Rwanda? No, I said what Britain should do, what the Tories should do is they should create a place somewhere in I don't know, some part of London, not even London, it could be somewhere in Kent. Kent would be great. So they just rename Kent Rwanda, and then just say, look, everyone is going to Rwanda. That's one way of just legislate that Kent is now Rwanda.
We don't think it is effective. We think there are proper, serious things you can do with that resource that would make a real impact on the problem of illegal migration. So, for instance, using that resource to go into tackling criminal smuggler gangs, making sure you're not having people in hotels for long periods of time at huge cost because you're processing those claims properly, working with your friends and allies in other countries to return people to those countries if they've come from there, if they don't have the right to be in the UK. These are the serious practical things that make a difference. It's not schemes like Rwanda. And just look at how this has affected the perception of Britain around the world as well. A huge cost to our reputation as a serious country. So
I see Max is being quiet because he's hiding from Sir Ron. I came up with that frigging idea. Which idea is that, Sam? Let me go back up. Sam, what? No, I don't see Sam's other comment. Is it about the common travel area?
No, I'm afraid I cannot.
What if they turned the Clarkson's farm into Rwanda? so yeah. That would be a good. Kent, just call Kent Rwanda. They can do it through Parliament. Parliament is sovereign. Remember, EU citizens can't enter Northern Ireland from Republic of Ireland for work unless they have the Frontier Workers Permit. EU citizens can no longer live and work in Northern Ireland unless they have the right of residence or a work visa. Yeah, and this was a big problem so ending of freedom of movement was a big problem. Well, a problem in Northern Ireland, because if there were people who were living in the Republic and working in Belfast, for example, or even just in Armagh, it would be a problem because they would be leaving the EU and entering a third country where there is no freedom of movement. Now, it was another live stream 1 week ago. A big fan of you, Max. Thank you so much, Sam.
Justify the Rwanda scheme at all in any way.
OK, let's talk about Scotland, because a vote of no confidence in the First Minister of Scotland, Hamza Youssef.
OK, so of course Labour are going to milk this one. There has to be a vote of no confidence, and we'll see how that goes. And of course, I'm going to reach out to David about that. So let's move on. Rishi Sunak and the Brexiteers and the Tories are not too happy about the current mayor of London, and they would like to replace him with Susan Hall. But Sadiq Khan has urged young Londoners to vote or risk a repeat of Brexit and Trump victory. So, of course, the big problem when it comes to voting is young people generally don't vote. And I think it makes sense for Sadiq Khan and others to try and convince young people to come out and vote and say, look, if you don't, there are consequences. Sadiq Khan has urged young Londoners to vote in the mayoral election, saying a shock victory for the Conservative Susan Hall would be like waking up to Donald Trump in power or Brexit in 2016. With his lead in the polls appearing to narrow, the Labour mayor said there were concerns that low turnout among young voters would allow a Tory mayor to sneak into City Hall. Labour sources said that the party's internal data suggested fewer than half of the 18 to 24-year-olds are aware of that photo ID was necessary to cast their ballot, compared with 98% of over 65s. Yeah, remember the Tories are trying to gerrymander, in a sense, try to throw as many blocks in the way of people's ways of people's chance of voting, disenfranchise as many as possible, to help themselves. It's not about, they don't care about actual fraud. If the Tories cared about fraud, half the party would be out on their ear. Anyway, Khan has been continuously more than 20 points ahead of his nearest rival Hall, but the recent Salvana poll for the Mile End Institute at Queen Mary University in London put the gap more at like 13 points. In 2021, Khan beat his Conservative rival Sean Bailey by just 4.7% in the first round of the voting, after polls had put him 20 points ahead in April of that year. So the polling in the London mayoral election is terrible. And while current polling is pretty good for Sadiq Khan, it's not a guarantee that he would win. So I think it makes sense for him to reach out to young people and say, look, do you want another Donald Trump in charge? Do you want another Brexit? Well, if you sit at home, and if you do, but even it's not a criticism of them sitting at home, but make sure you have your voter ID, check that it's right, check that it's valid, and then come out and vote, because if you don't, well, you know what will happen. Susan Hall is so dense, not even light can escape her gravitational pull. Well said, Brad. She had come out eventually and said, well, I actually support free school meals. So no, at the beginning, she didn't support free school meals because she said, well, what about rich people? Why are we giving all this money, spending all this money on rich people? Rich people, we need to punish poor people because some rich people might get away with having a free school meal. That was her thinking. Then she realized, well, that position is not very popular. So it's actually more popular to support free school meals. And then she tried to sell the idea that, well, I was actually, what I was talking about is there's no such thing as a free school meal, in the sense that it's not free, it has to be paid for by taxes. But I support free school meals for everyone. I always did. It's just, it was the language. It was a language barrier. Oh, God. And that's just excluding the stories of her claiming that she's trying to claim that crime had gone through the roof because she had her Oyster card, which is like a card to get around the city, her Oyster card stolen, and then it turned out it was, she had left it on the seat, and another passenger had found it and handed it in. Like, on two levels, that's really bad. First, claiming that there was a crime committed when there wasn't, and the second, that people, you generally think people in London are very cold and not unhelpful and narcissists or something. I'm not that I believe this, but this is the projection the Tories have of London. And somebody said, well, there's an Oyster card. Well, I could keep it, or I could just couldn't be bothered wasting my time handing it in. But they actually did that. It was very, very kind of them, very, very human of them. Keep up the good work, mate. Thank you so much, Nickelodeon. Sorry. Nickelodeon81. Thank you very much for that super chat. Very kind of you. Have a Nomax, her Oyster card mugged her. She was mugged by her, but it was who issued the Oyster card? Sadiq Khan. So it's in at the end of the day, it's Sadiq Khan's fault. It's basically Sadiq Khan mugging people. That's what it's like. They try to blame everything on Sadiq Khan. So The Irish government is not very happy with Rwanda, as we saw before. This is from The Guardian. It says, UK Rwanda policy is knee-jerk reaction to migration, says Ireland's Deputy Prime Minister. The UK government's Rwanda policy has been described as a knee-jerk reaction to migration by Ireland's Deputy Prime Minister, who said an influx of asylum seekers could arrive in Ireland as a result. Okay, so this hasn't actually happened. It's just could happen. Micheál Martin, Ireland's Taoiseach, reportedly said asylum seekers fearful of being removed from the UK to Rwanda were seeking sanctuary in Ireland. Ireland has taken in more than 100,000 refugees, about 3/4 from Ukraine. The influx has coincided with the acute housing crisis that has driven up rents and homelessness and fueled anti-immigration sentiment. A riot last November wrecked parts of central Dublin. Martin, who's also Ireland's Foreign Secretary, said, Foreign Minister, not Secretary, but anyway, said asylum seekers were seeking sanctuary here and within the European Union, as opposed to the potential of being deported to Rwanda. During a trip to Jordan on Wednesday, Martin said, we have 11 million people displaced from Ukraine and millions in Sudan. But the sort of knee-jerk reaction from, like the Rwanda policy, in my view, isn't really going to do anything with to deal with the issue. His remarks reported in the Daily Telegraph, which of course went down pretty well, came as the Rwanda bill, which would allow asylum seekers who arrive in the UK by irregular means to be deported to Kigali, received royal assent and was ratified as the Safety of Rwanda Act. Earlier this week, Emmanuel Macron criticised migration policies that involve sending people to African countries as a betrayal of our European values. The French president made the remarks in a wide-ranging speech on Thursday aimed at warning Europe against over dependence on other countries for security and trade. Yoni, thank you so much for that super chat. The entire Rwanda policy is scripted for headlines, not for implementation. Somebody forgot to tell the half pint. Yes, it's once, yeah, the people who are actually, look, I don't believe Micheál Martin when he says that this is going to send people to Ireland. I think it's just a general reaction against the policy. Maybe some people will go, but look, this is not going to stop the boats. It's not designed to stop the boats. It's designed to stop the flow of votes going. Stop the votes. It's about stopping a flow of votes going to other parties. It's about the Tories trying to be as cruel as possible in order to tactically hold on to some support. That's always what it was. Like, Rishi Sunak was not a fan of this policy. James Cleverly was not. James Cleverly called it batshit. Now they're both supporting it because they realise that, well, it will benefit them politically. But for how long? Because the problem with the Rwanda policy is that Rishi Sunak has spent a huge amount of political capital on it. Democratic Republic of Congo and Rwanda are two different countries, apparently. Apparently. we need Dominic Raab to give us a geography lesson. Andrew, thank you so much for that those memberships. For that membership to 1-2 Yoni, very kind of you. I think Yoni already has one, but that was very kind of you, very sweet. Just reading some of that picture. What Sonic looks like he's without a milk crate. I don't know how they got these pictures. These Jason Alden from EPA. Oh my goodness. Okay. We're almost at the end of stream, guys, so I just want to cover one final story before we go. We're well over the time, but I just want to cover this final one before we go.
It's possible.
So this is Christopher Hope, Tory MP. Let's hear what he had to say a few days ago in the House of Commons.
It's possible to say, when one looks back on the course of this Parliament, that probably if we hadn't if we had been able to scrutinise the regulations to a greater extent, and in the context of social distancing, that the Prime Minister who was in office at the time of the pandemic would still be in office today, because he would not, the regulations and restrictions of which he fell foul would not have been in place, because somebody would have asked some sensible questions and persuaded the government that such regulations in the workplace, where people were working during the emergency in order to try and deliver benefits for the people, that people working in such emergency situations should have been able to have a cup of tea or a bun together without falling foul of the law.
Oh my goodness. If Boris Johnson had not been a frigging liar and charlatan and crook, if Boris Johnson hadn't tried to defend corruption in his own party, if Boris Johnson hadn't protected people like Chris Pincher, then perhaps he would still be Prime Minister today. So this absolute rubbish about it's the rules and regulations during the pandemic that were the reason Boris Johnson was kicked out. If Boris Johnson, I have said this on a number of occasions, and this is a bit of a pushback against those, isn't that Christopher Chope? Yes. It's written Hope here. Chope. Yeah, his name is Chope, not Hope. I said this before. If these people, a bit of pushback against those who say that Boris Johnson was stabbed in the back, Boris Johnson was removed from office. Boris Johnson had an opportunity, because people said that he had a huge amount of support, including in his constituency. Then if he did, why didn't he run in the by-election? Why didn't he stand in the by-election? He ran away. Like, if he honestly believed that he had a massive amount of support, then why didn't he stand in the by-election? He didn't. He ran away from it because he was a coward, because he realized, actually, maybe I don't have as much support as people think I do, or as I do. I think I do. This is my response to anyone who says that Boris Johnson was removed from office for eating cake. No, he was removed from office by his own party because of corruption and his attempts to defend corrupt individuals. It all ran out. He ran out of road, and the idea that he was the victim here, or that he still had a huge amount of support, well, that all fell apart because he wouldn't stand in the by-election. If he stood in the by-election and won it, that's a different story. But he didn't. He knew he didn't have that support. He ran out of fridges to hide. So if the UK government should have invested more in fridges. If they had bought another 2 or 3 fridges, Boris Johnson would have still been Prime Minister. Guys, we're almost at the end of the stream, so I want to say thank you so much to everyone who came on tonight. Thank you so much for your support and for the super chats. Greatly appreciated. And thanks to the moderators for doing a wonderful job. Before we go, we have our one for the road. Hope you enjoyed this. I'm sure you will.
Colin from Portsmouth is on the line. Hello, Colin.
London has fallen, Anthony. It was an inside job by Sadiq Khan in his Islamist Trojan horse.
Where did you hear that from, Colin?
I overheard an elderly lady say it at a village fete over Easter.
Yeah,
and he can't even say Easter anymore because of Sadiq Khan's Sharia ules.
Well, what? You never even go to London, Colin, so what does it matter?
Well, I would do if it wasn't a no-go area.
Fair enough,
But it doesn't mean I shouldn't have a say in how Londoners live. It's our capital city. They have to save themselves from the precipice here, and the only way they can do that is by voting in Susan Boyle as mayor.
Susan Hall, Colin. Susan Hall.
Boyle, what's the difference?
Well, like Susan Boyle, she's about to be beaten by diversity, I guess.
Susan Hall is the best candidate the Conservatives have in the whole of London.
Yeah, that's quite terrifying when you think of it, isn't it, Colin?
Yes,
yeah.
But that's because it's such a no-go zone, she's the only Tory brave enough to enter.
Fair, yes.
She might not know the trivial stuff, like how much a bus ride is in this city she loves, or how much the police are paid, or who owns a bridge, or how to properly store her Oyster card when travelling.
Lot of stuff.
But Boris Johnson knew even less. We've had enough of these so-called experts.
That is true, Colin, that is true. But what if, with the sheer incompetence she's displayed so far, Susan Hall is in fact the Islamist Trojan horse designed by Sadiq Khan to bring down London for good? What about that, Colin?
Well, I tell you what, that makes far more sense than her being a genuine candidate, Anthony.
It does, yeah.
Susan Jihad Hall. I take my hat off to Sadiq. Well played, sir. Anyway, mate, thanks for having me on. Love to the family.
Love to the family, Colin. Love to the family.
Oh, there's a guy with a bin on his head. I'll vote for him.
Bin, Colin. Islamist. Bin.
Ah!
Best of luck to Count Binhead. So, guys, have a great weekend. See you on the Sunday roast on Sunday morning. And if I don't see you then, I'll see you on Tuesday, same bad time, same bad channel. Take care, good night, and be safe.